So while I'm doing this, Tom and Kevin, why don't you just introduce yourselves?
My name is Tom Earley. I'm the manager of global infrastructure for the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation was founded by Henry Ford and Edsel back in the 30s. We're the largest private foundation in the world. Not money-wise, Gates has much more than we do, but breadth, scope, and operations and reach around the globe, that's where we're at the largest scale.
Kevin Hyatt with the Walt Disney Company, focusing on the collaboration tool sets.
Great. So how do you define UC and collaboration in your organization, and what technologies are you using?
For us, unified communications is the most critical asset that we have, collaboration in that realm. Currently, we're a Cisco call manager shop, and we have that globally deployed around the world, and the various tools related to that. We're actually now moving to a cloud-based solution. We've adopted cloud in everything that we do, and so we are looking at various providers that provide cloud telephony on that. But we're also, in the nature of our business, we have a lot of collaboration going on with outside entities, be it the academic world or other foundations work together on that. So for us, it's not just internal communications, but it's external communications as well. That's very critical to us.
I think it would answer it in the sense that we have everything, unfortunately. I think part of the challenge that we end up having is whether we acquire companies or groups have their own kind of standards. So we've gone through a pretty heavy rationalization process in the last 3 or 4 years. And kind of, Ann, to your point earlier, I think the focus for us is, I don't think we're going to get to one common denominator from a platform. For example, I mean, we're obviously very heavy with the Microsoft side. So, you know, where do we rationalize Teams versus Slack, for example? That's a bit of a challenge for us. I think the other piece is, I mean, we also have focus on G Suite. You know, some of our creative teams use Google for their platforms. I think the focus for us is, as a steward or service owner, how do we mask the platforms in the sense that the users don't necessarily really care what tool set they're using. We try to provide them a standard set of interfaces, whether that's a one button to join type of functionality or something of that nature, and just make it so that it's ubiquitous, where if we pull a lever on the back end tomorrow and switch from product A to product B, the users are none the wiser. Sounds good. Obviously, from a scale perspective, it's very challenging, but that's kind of the goal for us moving forward.
So you've segued well into my next question. What works well and what needs improvement?
Again, I think from an ownership perspective, we kind of go back to the decentralization of the video tool sets, in the sense to say, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, if some of you were there, was users kind of are now used to, I don't want to say lower quality, but more standardized quality. Whether if a meeting doesn't go exactly well, it's not going to be the end of the world. So we always had this kind of parameter around the meeting saying they have to be fixed, they have to be focused, they have to be rock solid. That's kind of going away now. So I think from a lowering user expectations, or kind of setting user expectations, has been actually a boon for us, just from a growth perspective. But overall, I think, you know, the higher the number of meetings that you have, I think obviously the more issues you're going to have. But at the end of the day, I think, you know, you kind of look at it as a phone call. You know, if you accidentally get hung up on, you're still going to pick up the call and make it again. So, you know, if you rationalize it, it makes a little bit more sense.
Kevin raises a very good point on levels of expectation. Many people think of video as a television, and that when they turn the TV on, it goes on, and when they turn it off, it goes off. Well, that's not our video. Our video doesn't always work that way, and what we've found historically is if you set in the minds the level of expectation to the users of saying them, you have a cell phone and you drive areas where it sometimes does not work and you have to hang up and do it again. We as an industry never set 5 or 6 nines for video capability. If you're getting 95 to 98% video call completion, you're doing very well, and by that I mean it goes up, it stays up until you hang it up.
And I would just add, I think it also goes back to, and again, depending upon the company, is, you know, it has to be dial tone type of technology, right? Where dial tone always has to work, you know, because telecom sometimes led kind of the tail wagging the dog from the technology side in a lot of companies. So I think, again, that's kind of gone away, but I think the dial tone scenario is a very good example to say that it is what it is at this point.
Yes, but as you say, and I think you're smart in doing this, you have to set the level expectation in the mind of the users. And if you don't set it right, then they get mad when it doesn't work. And they don't understand that it's not working 99.9% of the time. Tom, other comments on what works well and what needs improvement?
First, the most critical where it needs improvement is regulatory, actually. Because for enterprise organizations, we're dealing with that where there's still countries in the world that will not release the telco laws, that they still want to control that voice traffic, that video traffic through their network. So moving to a cloud telephony solution is not practical without putting gateway appliances in. And if your goal is not to have infrastructure, that's a no-go solution for us in that regard. The other is, you were hitting on it in some of your slides, is the interoperability piece to this, especially we're a Google G Suite shop completely. Hangouts meet on that. We're also moving to Google LDAP. We're basically punting Microsoft out of our environment completely. And so there are some solutions that are supporting that, and there's some that are not. And it makes our decision harder to which solution to look at.
Tom, could you hold the microphone a little
Oh,
closer?
sure.
Josh, you had a comment?
Yeah, hi.
Bill, turn it up.
Okay. So, this is Josh Kleiper from Citigroup. I'm not presenting, I'm not sitting there. I was listening, heard some great things, Ann, in your presentation. I immediately hooked into a number of things I wanted to ask about. And Kevin, Tom, some of the things I've heard you talk about, I have some questions for you as far as our perspective at Citi as well. So as far as what works well and what doesn't, what we find often is there are elements that work really, really well. And they might work really, really well by themselves. But in these big complex enterprises, getting them to work together, that's the trick. And so when I see the slides that Ann has so thoughtfully put together with the different technologies and manufacturers and developers and all that, it's a continual learning, a discovery path, right? A journey to find the right people. A lot of those things work great by themselves, but together in a big complex organization, that's the big challenge. And I don't think it's so possible to get it right the first time at all. In fact, I was just thinking, listening to you, I've sort of come of age because throughout my entire career, I can't really tell what needs to happen next until I see some of the deployment already in the ground. And apparently, we're all starting to see that now with the complexity of these networks and technologies. The other piece, by the way, Tom, that you hit on, oh my God, the global data privacy challenge. That is remarkable. Last year, I completed my own 95-country data privacy agreement and review process. It was not a lot of fun. I learned a bunch, but all of these things are now connected, right, to these initiatives. Anyway, those are a couple of things. I'll leave it.
I would kind of, and similar to what I was saying earlier from a Rift perspective, I think the focus for us is we're going to have multiple tool sets. Again, how do you mask that from the end user perspective is kind of up to you. And I'm fine with managing multiple tool sets, and I kind of look at it from the 80-20 rule to say, okay, you know, what can we get out to 80 to 90% of the mass population? We're always going to have little semblances of Cisco WebEx or G Suite or smaller platforms from a footprint perspective, but you know, how do we kind of standardize on platforms? And you rationalize it back to the IT side. We don't do that today for, you know, we have Windows and Macs. You know, we have you know, other devices from a iOS or Android platform perspective. We don't isolate out that IT part of it, so why would we do that from a collaboration tool set? And again, to Tom's point earlier, from an interoperability perspective, we do tons of business with other companies, so we're not going to force somebody to use our tool set to talk to Disney.
Understood. I think you just hit on something else as well. We have a tremendous number of tools at Citi as well. We are both a Cisco shop, a Microsoft shop, but we're on the move. We're on the move to doing other things as well, and we have to continue to be on the move, and these are really big initiatives. But goal is to provide agility to our workers. And so we're trying to provide all these things so they can make the right decisions based on what they're doing. We have a big, confusing enterprise with lots of different flavors in it. And so we want to make these tools available. But the big dilemma is people don't know what to use. And that's really hard. So adoption, education, that's got to go with all this stuff as well. I see you guys can resonate with that.
I mean, again, I talked about this yesterday, we have grown our customer success and advocacy group tenfold in the last 2 years, and I think it's partly because of that. And the collaboration is just one iota of it, because we're rolling out a lot of the other Office components, whether it's the Power Apps or Power BI or even on the Slack side, from a Slack perspective. So I would definitely advocate putting a lot of effort towards that. And one thing I would circle back on that you had said, Josh, is become friends with a security perspective. I think from the security side, it's paramount today to ensure not only from a data privacy perspective, but from a legal and IT security perspective, it is completely different than it was 5 or 10 years ago, where they have to have a seat at the table because of the global footprints that these groups have now.
Tom, you have comments on that?
Oh, yeah, to your point, the adoption comment that you made, yeah. For one of the things we did 2 years ago was we adopted a Wi-Fi only soft client approach, and we're 100% Jabber in our environment, but adoption failed for us. And the biggest reason was headphones. Not that they didn't work, but we got a lot of comments that people didn't want to use them because they messed up their hair. I know it's funny, but that was the reason behind it. On that. So we're now having to scramble and rip out that type of infrastructure and put traditional handsets on.
I hate headsets also, by the way.
Yeah.
You're just using the wrong headset. You gotta go to a company that's got a choice for it.
Oh, we provided multiple choices. We did on that, and we said, here, pick which one. We had like 5 different models, but but to your point, it was about adoption. So now we've actually that is a lot has changed, as I meant my earlier comment about the regulatory, because what opened up recently in the past 6 months is India and China both allowing cloud telephony, which that was my biggest hindrance, because my boss every year is going, Tom, move us to the cloud, move us to the cloud, and I'm like, I can't, we don't have coverage in our countries. That opened up in the past 6 months, and that was great. And so now that's our goal for this year, is to get cloud telephony deployed globally for us.
Okay, yes.
I have a question.
I'm sure you do.
Kevin, I know you have this perspective, but I'd be curious, Tom and Joshua, when you're in a large organization that absorbs other organizations, that we have this whole new company that we're dealing with today that we weren't dealing with yesterday, and they had their standards that are different than your standards. Do you find yourself at a point where you're trying to get everybody over to the same place and try and omit some of the partners and players that you're dealing with? Or are you comfortable living in a hybrid organization where you have all these different choices because the company A had picked A, but company B had picked B, and you're dealing with this big mess and everybody's got to talk to each other?
It's a great question, because I'm living that today. So
I kind of do that.
again, that's kind of the validation as to why we look at it from a hybrid approach. I think that the goal for us is, again, mask it from an end user perspective. And I think and somebody mentioned it earlier, it's an iterative situation, right? I mean, we were very early from a Disney perspective to adopt a cloud video platform as the tool set. But today we're at a kind of a crossroads. So we need to kind of start figuring out the next solution. Is it the solution that from the company that we acquired? Maybe not, don't know. But I do think that it gives us the flexibility. So I think, again, it's really how you can kind of plan for it, but ultimately it's a good problem to have, right? Options are there, and I think the iterative part is super important in this space at this point.
Fortunately, I haven't had to deal with that headache on that from our environment. We don't buy up other organizations.
Okay, so what would you like the vendors or service providers to be doing for you that they're not currently doing?
I think from an industry perspective, going back to my earlier comment about regulatory, is being more influential and lobbying the governments around the world to embrace this technology, to allow their countries to prosper, and allow us to then use that technology where we currently can't use it. That would be biggest hurdle that would benefit this industry to me.
Having done that with a number of countries many years ago, I can tell you they listened to the providers, meaning the big companies who hired their people much more than they listened to us coming in from a consulting or telecommunications perspective. So what we found worked for us in the various countries is to find the biggest players who were hiring their workforce and get us together as a group to then lobby the government to make the changes.
And several comments have been made about this. It is about interoperability. Is that the all-in-one solution for organizations like us and Disney most likely is not the solution for us, because like we have Slack and a lot of our partners use Slack, and so that sometimes will tie into a various UCaaS solution, sometimes it doesn't, or on that piece of it. And so they truly need to be able to interoperate between various platforms.
I think I would just add from a vendor perspective is focus on solutions that kind of help gap fill the situations that we have from an IT organization. Again, one of them I mentioned was become experts from a security perspective. I think that's very important. I think the other one is, and I think Mark stepped out for a second, but from an AV consultation perspective, how do you focus on the next generation workplace and just a lot of those tool sets? I think from a manufacturer side, I think it's flattened out from an iteration and evolution of technology, which I think is a good thing. And again, the price points have come down to the point where I hate to say that they're commodity-based types of solutions, but I think giving us the time now to focus on work around the workplace and just kind of sussing out the situation that we have from an IT organization, I think will help. We don't need platform decision makers, because I think from an IT organization, large companies like us, we have that tool set. Where I think we need help is in the security kind of vision perspective a little bit. And then from the manufacturer side, I think we've talked about it as the interoperability is key, but I do think the flexibility is also important, because I don't see the technology changing greatly in the next 3 to 5 years.
You never know.
And to emphasize, the point, yes, security is absolutely key. I'm an IT guy. I actually, like David, I started out in television, I moved to IT, and then as soon as they heard I had a television background, I got pulled back into the industry on that piece. But that's been our pain point in a lot of solutions, is dealing with that, you having to put that type of technology in and abide by the security policies of your organization, because they don't all play well, unfortunately, on that. And usually the security guys are like, no, you can't do that.
Jerry?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, Jerry Pompa, Compunetics. So to your point about what do you want from vendors, I could agree with you more about security, but if I could sort of go back and play off of something you said, Kevin, regarding expectations. And I'm really interested in, maybe Ann, as the godmother of the industry, your discussion on it, and also the city and maybe JP. But I'm a little surprised that so the reality is you cited the example of you're driving along and your mobile phone drops. That's a reality. But I'm a little surprised, and the fact is, you turn on your video conferencing system and your expectation is it should work like a television, but the reality is different. So I recognize that the reality is a little different from what the expectations maybe used to be. But I'm a little surprised, Kevin, when you said, well, that's just the way it is. That's the way our expectations are. And I'm a little, so if anybody knows Compunetics, we focus a lot on high quality, high reliability, that kind of thing. And I'm a little disappointed in that in a sense, because I think if you ask David from Poly or the sales management from Poly, or Compunetics, or maybe a lot of other, or if you ask Eric from Zoom, as vendors, we're trying to build the most reliable, high-quality solutions, and I don't want large enterprise clients like Disney or Citi or JP to start to say, "Well, it's okay if it doesn't work all the time." I'm a little concerned about a drop in expectation, because the reality will never match. So
I understand.
When JP decided to go from Cisco to Zoom, I'm guessing, maybe they can say to 250 of their 280,000 employees, well, if it drops, just reconnect. but their executive management has to not accept that. So,
Yeah, I mean, let's clarify that. So, obviously, from a high standards perspective, we're up there. So I think that there are a couple things. One is, from a cloud perspective, we completely expect 99.9%, whether it's 2 nines, 3 nines, 4 nines, whatever. So that is a given standard. I think my point, Jerry, was, give the users the flexibility to say, okay, you don't need to go into a conference room. If you want to sit at your desk and do the video call there, great. The point was, if it ends up being that if they have technical challenges, it's not the end of the world. They'll figure it out. They'll get it connected, or heaven forbid, they actually have to walk into a conference room and meet with other people. So I think the point was, giving those users the flexibility and the tool sets that they can do it wherever, whenever. So I maybe back my statement up a little bit just to say that we give them the flexibility. If they have technical challenges, we'll obviously help solve them, but we definitely have high standards.
So having a multimodal approach, so that if, okay, if I don't have a connection this way, then I can operate that way. Sure.
I'm going to step back to reality, and it's the reality of the world we all live in now. We no longer buy washers and dryers that last 25 years, or any of our other appliances that last that length of time. We don't buy one phone and it lasts 10 years. When we use our cell phones, we know there are certain areas we drive through that we're going to lose the service. Now, we like, after a period of time, to think that the telephone company or the cable provider has gotten smart enough to fix that area. But in reality, as a society, we are now accepting the fact that we don't have the longevity of these things. And I recently redid a house with appliances, and I said to the manufacturer and the provider of the technology, I'm willing to buy whatever it takes to get something that will match what I used to do with 20, 25 years. And they said, we have nothing to sell you. They've said all the innards of all these pieces of equipment are all made in 3 locations around the world. They slap different names on the front and logos, much like cars are being built. And they said, I can't sell you anything that's going to last 20 to 25 years for 2 reasons. One was, a lot of the innards are plastic now. They're not metal. They're not as strong as they used to be. And the secondly is that the providers want you to improve the technology every so many years. So they said, well, at least within an appliance, you're lucky if you get 8 years out of it. And with regards to the technology we're in, the mistake we made initially was to tell everybody this worked like your television, especially video space. And when we really started peeling the onion back, we found the telephone companies worldwide never got together to set a standard for video connectivity. They just didn't do it. It's never been done. So I like to say to the minds of the users, think of these like you think of your cell phone. Oh yeah, I realize if I lose the call, I have to dial it again. They accept that. If you say to them, think of these like you do your television, you turn it on, stays on, and turn it off. Now, maybe they're better nowadays with cable, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I have glitches in cable service more frequently than I'd like. But we've become a very disposable society. And all I'm suggesting with regards to the technologies we're sending into the workplace is to say to people, let's look at the reality of the situation.
But the disposable aspects of appliances or other technologies is the deliberate revenue strategy.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
I wanted to jump in and support Kevin on this. Unfortunately, users have a perception that we control the complete connection from point to point. And I don't know how many times something has gotten escalated to me saying, oh, this voice call or video call was horrible, and then we come to, because the other end, they were in the woods or they were in a conference room where they're 50 feet away from a speakerphone, and they think we messed up. And we're like, it's about the user perception on that, and that's we have to do a better job of making sure they understand that. But
I would add also that, it's the noise factor, right? From a service ownership perspective, if I get 1 or 2 comments a day about a bad call, I'm okay with that. We do 12,000 video calls a day in this space, so I'll take 1 or 2 calls daily. But I think that the point is that the trajectory for the usage is going this way. The volume of noise from an end user perspective is going down. So I think that's, there's some validation to that.
And Josh?
I just want to cap this a little bit because I feel for you guys as well. One of my hats is problem management globally for audio, video, and web on our first touch or second touch escalations. As far as all these things have to blend together. The end-to-end, that is a big deal. But I tell you one thing that causes a lot of tolerance, by the way, money. We have big, complex enterprises with multiple flavors of technology, different manufacturers, and it's not always well understood every penny that has to be spent by all parties to make sure that there's reliability, continuance of business, right? Consistency. And one of the things I was thinking about when I was looking at some of your slides before is the word performance and quality. Those are two really big factor elements that have to be identified when you're looking for a solution, but we all own what that performance is going to look like based on the different products that we anticipate working together, and it has to work inside our own environment. So our senior leadership on our decision makers, they have to be partners with us on that. And so that's part of setting the expectation as well. And sometimes we're also going to be a victim of our own success, right? Let's say you have tremendous adoption. Now your volumes are going to go way up, and you may see capacity issues that you couldn't even dream of initially. So all of these things come together. I think the partnership, the dollars, all of that has to be kind of blended together. Anyway, I just want to mention that. Thanks. Question over here?
Tim from Barco. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, go back to talking about some of the hybrid environment and dealing with IT and the end users' experiences. Do you have metrics, or do you know how many people are using dedicated room systems versus bringing in their own devices? And how comfortable is that a generational thing? Is it, like maybe older generations are used to having a dedicated codec type system? And I'm talking about soft codec, dedicated computers, because to me it's the same thing really. Versus using their laptop to make that call via Slack, Google Hangouts, whatever.
I would say we don't have complete metrics of all of that. I know internally all our meetings are on one platform and they're automatically created on any event and utilizing that way. Do we know how many times someone, because they're joining someone else's offering of a WebEx call, that we don't have the metrics for?
I guess I would just add that, and that's one advantage of using these tool sets from these cloud service providers, is from a command center or dashboard perspective, you do get immediate insights to some of those. And I would just generally say that I think it's 80% of our calls are done through the desktop app. But from a growth perspective, I know that I'm not going to grow the number of end users I have versus the number of huddle or conference rooms. The conference rooms and huddle rooms, it's a real estate issue, right? But the growth of the end users is, I don't want to say infinite, but it's farther reaching than I have to worry about from the room systems. But and we do allow kind of the generally speaking, the BYOD perspective, whether it's an iPad or iOS or Android device. But we do standardize the room systems. But I think from the usage perspective, it's the higher usage is the desktop app perspective.
As leaders, do you guys prefer one way or another, or does your IT organization prefer one way? I would imagine, just from my own experience in the industry, where I was short comparatively to the other folks in this room, obviously IT folks prefer to manage, like a dedicated endpoint that they can watch and see it connect to the network and manage it through, like a single pane of glass type thing. But is there something you guys as leaders within the UC space prefer?
Yeah, one thing that's challenging for us, because we're in a lockdown app type of scenario where we outsource most of our IT organization. So if an app needs to iterate, and again to Ann's point earlier, and David mentioned it, yesterday, was these apps are iterating literally every week from a version control. So from a version management perspective, it's really challenging, because I literally would just have to keep opening up requests to say, okay, move to product X version 43.5 and 43.6, and we have to unburden ourselves from an IT perspective to say, okay, why not allow auto updating from an app perspective? And it goes back to my comment around the security side, is there's reasons why we don't do that, but that honestly is a burden. But it's not that I'm moving mountains, but it's not something that I really enjoy dealing with.
We encourage both on that. Unfortunately, though, we do see, because our facility, you can walk around and see where meetings are, that unfortunately we do see individuals in a 10-person room having a Hangouts Meet call on the premise equipment all by themselves, and then the recipients, and one person on the other side. We'd rather they use a browser at their desk. But we don't discourage them not to do that. We rather them use the technology.
Hi, so thinking this through.
Name and company.
Mark Peterson, Shendelson, Wilkie Consulting. We have options when we meet with just spontaneously the group to share content, right, in a room. And this measuring how quickly we can get shared content. We've got wireless sharing providers, right? But I was thinking about this morning that any meeting that I'm having with more than 4 people, there's likely someone who's not going to be there, right? I mean, just there's a model, a mathematical number, which I'm pretty sure that even if I schedule that meeting, so we're talking about scheduled meetings, I've got to anticipate someone can't be there, and where we are with workflow, I'm going to just put a link into the invite, right? So it just becomes, to me, a natural extension of that. Why not every meeting, every session, just be in that same environment? Why are we shifting gears for one type of meeting and saying, okay, we're going to present locally, share it on a display, and then in another meeting, we have to use a link because we just don't know, can't guarantee who's going to be in the room. So I'm curious, from your enterprise level, are you looking at that? Does it make a difference? Because it seems such a struggle to establish different modalities and methodologies depending upon those premises.
I mean, yeah, and Mark knows this word is way overused right now, is the frictionless aspects of meetings, but it really resonates just because for us it's a challenge. And I think, again, if you can kind of standardize on one larger platform as your platform of choice, it does make it a little bit easier. It's certainly not frictionless, but it goes back to, okay, where's the majority of your meetings being held? Again, 80% of those meetings are being held at somebody's desktop. So, the relative ease is going to be they're going to use that desktop app as their sharing device. Where I do think we have the challenge is the iterations of the room systems. Kind of chasing the unicorn for the wireless or tool sets that other companies have, like the Poly solution that they have with the new X30s and 50s with the Miracast and AirPlay thing. Great, if we can make sure that it works within an enterprise. But it is a challenge for us, and I think, again, it's one of those iterative things, but I think if you use the platform as the tool set, again, it solves that 80% 80-20 rule that we kind of live and die by.
So talk a little bit, and I didn't throw this in as a question, but I'm going to now, about the open workspace environment versus the desk. You're talking at your desk with a headset. We're going to have some Generation Zs tomorrow. One of them is someone I know well who's been in an office environment and now moved into an open workspace environment, and they're finding it a little difficult in certain instances, so they have to run and find an enclosed space, a huddle room. How does that work within your organization, the whole open workforce environment?
That was my answer to this gentleman, was because we are an open workspace, and it's very routine for us that 4 people are on the same call, sitting all next to each other, and our noise levels drown out everybody around us, and we're like, no, take it to a huddle room, get out of here, and use the premise equipment to handle that kind of situation on that. And it also goes to, I think earlier was, it's about the quality of the headsets that I mentioned earlier, that in the open workspace it's absolutely critical that you have that voice cancellation capabilities in your headset, or forget it, you're not communicating well.
Or use, facilities types of solutions like sound masking that will help, solve a lot of that. It definitely, when we have that same situation, we've got many open workspaces, a lot of solutions that are team tables, and there's 2 or 3 people sitting at the same table on the same call, and you can, literally see the person's elbow on the other side of the person's screen, and they're sitting right next to them. So it's a challenge, but use other tool sets like sound masking and other platforms, and the headsets are critical.
Hey, it's JR from JP Morgan again. I want to ask a question, but I also want to make clear, we're still evaluating we're still evaluating, and part of the evaluation is the camera systems that I'm talking about and everything, see if it can come up to quality. I was wondering if you guys in your rooms have experimented with multiple surfaces. So certainly most of our rooms have a single surface where you see the video of the people there, and it'll switch and so forth. Track won't happen, but with the newer cloud-based systems, there's a lot more tools available. You've got your collaboration tools, you've got your whiteboarding, you've got your, you name it, it's all available now. So I'm wondering how many people have looked into permanently multiple surfaces in rooms, or encouraging people to bring their own devices and sort of collaborate locally?
I would, we used to be more agnostic from a tool set perspective. I guess I would just add and kind of give Cisco one prop for the day is their Touch 10 interface from a user interface perspective has a lot of flexibility from an API side. And I think that's very advantageous. So for example, you can easily add a BlueJeans button, a Zoom button, a Microsoft Teams button, a WebEx button, or some other type of shortcut. That is huge from a flexibility perspective for tool sets that a location maybe uses 2 or 3 of the 5 major vendors. And then also the other platforms like Synergy Sky is another great solution for one button to join, where you just create a bunch of regex rules. It goes and parses the information off of the calendar, and it does its magic on the back end. So you don't really care what tool set they're using. There's just a join button, and it could be joining a WebEx meeting, and again, the users are unaware of what meeting they're joining, as long as the information is properly in the invite.
In our facilities, we also have convening spaces that other groups come in and use. And in some of the rooms, we did build out, to your point, dual type systems. So we have a traditional Cisco SX80 with presenter track kind of systems in place, as well as our internal Google Hangout Meet solutions. We're looking at the metrics on that, how much of what's being used on both sides. Will we keep 2 permanently? No. One of them will go eventually.
We're asking about if you have a single solution, let's say you're going with Zoom or WebEx or whatever, and you've got the different collaboration tools within the cloud-based system. So as I was mentioning earlier, Zoom has your whiteboarding, Zoom has your collaboration. And so have you guys gone to multiple screens within a specific room to accommodate all that additional functionality that comes with those cloud-based solutions? Or are you encouraging people to bring their own devices and do whiteboarding on their iPad, and it shows up and is shared within the call?
I know we're in the Google facility, so I guess I'm giving Google a plug on that. One of the things we've deployed out is, to your point, is the Jamboard solutions, and we encourage that people are sitting there, they're jamming on their laptop as well as jamming on their screens and interacting between the both, and also sharing that out through the Hangouts as well, so that it's being viewed by third parties outside of our environment, and being able to do the whiteboard sharing as well in that.
Mark Heimson with Hyatt. So as you guys think about your roles, how do you guys define whether you're successful? I mean, are there KPIs, metrics? Is it just the absence of bad things not happening?
Yeah, generally speaking. I can sleep at night, don't get a phone call at 2 o'clock saying that a call to Shanghai went down. No.
That's easy to figure out.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's how you make of it. I think we're kind of in that stage, and to your point, and what Viopta does is trying to figure out that single pane of glass from a visibility perspective. I think aggregating all this information is critical to the success. Thankfully, I've had the luxury where I don't really get questioned from an ROI or TCO perspective, but other organizations, I'm sure they do. So I think there's those, and that's why obviously the Vioptas of the world exist. So I think from us, growth, usage, less noise, good problem to have. And again, just generally speaking. But I literally every day I have my dashboards open, monitoring calls, looking at volume, and then aggregating all that information together on a monthly. And then I also do it for a yearly basis, again, to kind of validate what we're doing is in the right sense. So it's a manual process. So yes, if we could automate that, it certainly would be a bit easier. But I think tool sets like yours and the Tableaus and Power BIs of the world are making that a lot easier.
I mean, for us in the philanthropic world, ROI model is obviously different than on that. So we're not looking at, if I invest X amount of dollars, we'll see this amount of profit coming out of this scenario. So the metrics we do look at is, okay, is utilization, are people using the tool on that? Have we reduced travel costs because people are now comfortable using the meeting platforms in place instead of flying somewhere around the world, which they quite extensively do on that. And then it is the service desk tickets, and like how many people have complained about something in that, and that's what we look at.
To wrap this up, I want to ask one last question of our panelists. what recommendations would you give to other users looking to deploy UC in collaboration? What have you learned? What are your nuggets that you can pass along to everybody else?
I think, there's go cloud. There's no doubt that cloud is the future. So I think focusing on that, and then again finding a reseller or vendor that fits with your strategy. I know that's kind of generic speaking, but try to find those solutions because you need the partners in that space. And I'm glad that we moved quickly to the cloud. Now again I'm at a crossroads where I have to do a massive change management. If we would decide to switch, but I think that I would be better suited now than from a financial perspective, comparative to like what JR and team's doing at Chase. I think that's and to Josh's point, for a city, it's a monumental climb. So at least mine's an iterative approach.
I would add is extensively research everybody in the industry. Don't get drawn in by who's the big player in the market and jump to them and start trying to put a solution in place. You got to look across all your vendors out there that are offering the solution, and then obviously where they're supporting on that. Especially if you're an organization like us, where we have offices in Africa and Asia, not all these vendors play well in those spaces on that. And so we had to look outside the traditional U.S.-based companies and look for something that was a little more global in reach.
Josh, you want to comment?
I just want to cap this before I leave to make sure that this comes out. Looking at all these solutions and all these discussions, application-wise though, and use case, and I know it depends if we're someone that says UC or UCC, and I know there's collaborate, and much of what we're talking about is all around, interactive collaboration, but these feature sets and these tools are still going to be necessary for a one-to-many scenario, depending upon, the style of your organization and what kind of communications they do and everything. And so we do a tremendous amount of special events, one-to-many events for all the different lines of businesses across Citigroup all the time. We have many, many tools and resources, but think about how whatever you pick is going to fit into that strategy also, because guaranteed you're going to have something so big, right? Informationally from your leadership that needs to go out and touch every little corner of the organization. Figure out how you're going to leverage all that and how that's going to play. I know that's at least my experience, and I just want to share that.
I want to thank you all for your time this morning. We're going to take a break now until 20 of 11, so roughly 15 minutes, then come back because you'll be pleased to hear Sandy Jones talk from Google.